Hey everyone, first lecture video of the semester for Geography 152, World Regional Geography. The way I do these lecture videos is I've already given you several other videos to watch from online. I think they do a lot better and probably sound a lot better than I do about explaining some of these things. Plus, they're more visually appealing. They're actually videos and not just a lecture. So hopefully you do get something out of those, and I try to make these a little bit shorter. Most of the information that we're going to go over obviously is from our textbook, so if you do your reading assignments, you're going to cover most of this, and I strongly encourage you to do your reading assignments, to go ahead and do those, because in these lectures I'm not going to go over every single thing that we talk about in the textbook. As you know, we only have a limited amount of time. I don't want to make a 3-hour long lecture video every time we do one of these every week. So I just want to make this kind of short, and I'm going to more, instead of just going over every specific piece of information and explaining everything, I might do that just a little bit for the more important points, but what I'm going to try to do is relate it to real world things, things that we actually experience in life, because I think that's the best way to learn things. So don't think of these lecture videos as a replacement for reading the textbook. It's a supplement. So as we start out, and as I mentioned in the introductory video, geography is a very important discipline, and I can list off all the things. I gave you a few examples in the intro video about different applications that we could use geography for. And one of those YouTube videos that I provided is very interesting, about people that have different career paths that they use geography within their careers. So what I want to do is kind of relate this to our everyday lives. Now, one thing that we're going to talk about a lot in this course are maps. A lot of people think that geography is just studying maps and memorizing your states and capitals and countries and their capitals. That is far from the truth. However, maps are very important in geography. It's a way that we can interpret information about various different things to the general population. And if you think about it, you see maps all the time. If you ever watch the weather forecast on the news, they use maps. If you drive anywhere and you need directions, they use maps. That's what Google Maps is. It's right there in the title. So when you're driving somewhere, you have to have some kind of spatial knowledge. Spatial is a word that means where something is in a particular scenario, that being on the surface of the planet or within your house or within your state. So the spatial distribution of things is very important to how we interact and live and conduct business on this planet. This map on the screen right now, it's very important too, and this is kind of an aside from what you read in the textbook. Anytime you look at a map anywhere, make sure you look at the title of that map. Because just looking at this looks like a map of the world, which it is. However, if you look at the top, this is an elevation map of the world. So what does that mean? That means this map is interpreting how tall a particular place is on the Earth's surface. And right down here you see the key of the map, and that's the elevation. So bluer is lower towards sea level. That's what we measure everything from on the surface of the planet, is sea level, all the way up to the brown, which is going to be your taller elevations. So you can't see a lot of detail on this map just because it covers the whole planet, but you can see the brown kind of stand out. The Himalayan mountains, the Rocky Mountains over here, the Andes Mountains down in South America. So whenever you look at a map, the first thing you probably should look at is the title. What type of information is that map trying to convey to you when you look at it? Because this could just as easily be a population map of the world or something else. Make sure you look at the title to see what the object of that map is. So here are the primary things we're going to discuss in this initial chapter. This chapter will not be included in a test. However, the things that we go over in this chapter, first of all, we will have a quiz, but second of all, we'll be leaning on these things the rest of the semester and all of our other lessons. So you need to learn this content up front. So we're going to talk about, of course, I just mentioned maps. We look at diversity in the world, different cultures, different types of living, from more technology to less technology, or more wealth to less wealth, and how people live and the inequalities across the world with regards to populations, threats to the world like climate change, and then how people move within the world. Why do we have people moving from one part of the world to the other? We're going to talk about those things as well. And it's not as simple as you might think sometimes that the news cycle makes you want to believe it is, or some politician wants you to believe it is. It's not that simple, and we're going to talk about all those things. And hopefully by the end of this course, you're going to have a good understanding of at least somewhat more how the world works around us. And we tend to live, and I think I mentioned this in the introduction video, we tend to live in our own little box. We have our little space in the world. Now that's broadened because of technology, because you all have grown up with this. When I was young, we didn't have internet, we didn't have the World Wide Web, anything like that. We didn't have cell phones when I was young. So we really lived in our own corners of the world then. But even now, even with all the technology, even though you can reach out and gather information from different places at the click of a finger, still you have your own kind of box that you live in the world, and you surround yourself with things that are familiar to you. And getting out of that box and understanding the different perspectives people have across the world and different reasons why the world is the way it is, it's very important to have a general awareness about the world around us. And that's something that's sorely lacking today. So hopefully you all get something out of this class. So here are a lot of concepts and ideas. I'm not going to go through each one of these. We're going to kind of cover these as we go through this PowerPoint presentation. Again, it's all in your textbook, but I'm going to just kind of hit the highlights of some of these different ideas. When you look at that list, the last couple pages that I just kind of glossed over, if you're going to do good in this course, if you're going to do good on your tests that are coming up in future modules, you need to know what these mean. You can't just kind of ignore these. These are going to be key throughout our course. So going back to maps. So we think of maps as being something either like a hard copy map, like on a piece of paper in an atlas, or on a computer or on your cell phone, something that we can physically look at. But maps are more than that. You have maps in your brain. Something as simple as you walking from your bedroom to your kitchen. That's a mental map. You know how to navigate through your home. That's simple. That's the simplest terms we can get, but still, that's a mental map. You have a mental map about how to drive to your school, or from your school to your hometown. Maybe, of course, I'm teaching out of Sky. We might have some students on here that are from other technical colleges across the state, but if you get in your car and you drive from school to home, you have a mental map of that. You know where to go. You know where to turn, which roads to take. So maps are essential to human activity, whether we want to think about it or not. Even a map in our head of how to use a cell phone. You do this step, this step. These are all mental maps that we have to be able to operate our everyday life. Now, the actual making of the map, it's called cartography. And cartography, when I was in school way back in the day, we talked a lot about the old school way of making maps. We had remote sensing. We had like satellites that would take pictures and things like that, but then those maps could either be printed or people had to physically draw the maps from those satellites. In the very old days, before any kind of technology, they basically did it from memory. They would go observe a place, they would somewhat measure it in some capacity, and they would come back and they would draw maps. And it's amazing how accurate some of these maps were considering the technology they had at the time. So cartography in general is the making of maps. Now, remote sensing, I just gave you an example of that. A satellite that flies in our sky above the earth and takes pictures of different parts of the planet or all of the planet. And we can take those photos and we can take data from that. We can make maps from those images, whether it be road maps, whether it be infrared. There's all kinds of different stuff we can do with this. Now, geographic information system. This is very important, and I talk about this more in our Google Earth videos. I want you to be sure to download and watch those videos with Google Earth, because we're going to use Google Earth throughout the entire semester. And the use of this, while it's something kind of extra to the textbook, it really is more fun and you learn more by using this. Google Earth is a wonderful tool, and it is from Geographic Information System. When I was in graduate school, GIS is the acronym for Geographic Information System, was just kind of starting to be used mainstream. And the best way I can give you an image of what this is you think about a paper map. Let's go old school. Paper map laying on a table. Say that map has the boundaries of all the countries on it. So with our technology in a computer now, what we can do is we can have another map. Let's say a map of the whole world that has cities on it. So now we can take that layer of cities and lay it on top of that first map of countries, and then you have both of these two different types of information on the map. You have one map. So let's say we want roads. So now we take another layer that just has roads, and they lay that on top of the map, and now we have 3 stacks of different types of information. Now, I just use the most basic, simple types of information that we have. Most maps have that type of information already on them. But I wanted you to get a picture of that, because what I wanted you to see is we can take an infinite number of data sets, different layers of maps, and lay them on top of each other and keep doing that, and use those to extract information, to see trends, to see possible causes of certain things. And I use the medical example in our intro video. Let's say we have a specific type of cancer that's really prevalent in, say, Louisville, Kentucky. Okay, where are the people in Louisville getting this cancer? So we're going to put that on the map. Where these people live, we're going to put a dot on the map for every place each one of these people live. We're going to put that layer on the map. Okay, now we're going to get another layer. Let's say we think it might be from a certain chemical used at a certain type of factory. Okay, we're going to get another layer, and we're going to put all the factories that use that chemical on the map. And we're going to put that on top of where the houses are that people get that cancer. So now we are starting to build a map that might be able to tell us if there's a relationship between those two things, the cancer and the chemical. We would use other maps. For instance, we would use weather maps. Which way does the wind blow when it comes past these factories? Is it downwind where people are getting this cancer, or was it upwind? If it's upwind, it might not be that chemical. So that's that's a good example of how we can use maps and geography to solve problems. And it gets a lot more complex than that, but that's a very good example that I've seen. So spatial perspective, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I've kind of already discussed this. So this map is a typical map that you would see. You can see this X on Google Earth. If you do a world view and do the night view, you can see this is a night view of the planet with lights that reflect light into space. So this is what the satellites pick up when looking at light. So, okay, that's great. So going back to what I just said about this very specific example of the medical stuff, you can interpolate information from this. Yes, this is where the light is. Great. So we got that. So how's it distributed? What's it mean when you see a lot of light in a certain place and you don't see any light in other places? Well, it could mean different things. It could mean there's not a lot of people that live in Africa. More live in Europe and the United States. Is that true? Well, we know that's not true. We know that there's a lot of people that live in Africa, and sometimes there are areas that are just as populated as these areas in the United States and Europe. So then what is it? Well, then maybe they don't have electricity in those areas. That's why you don't see any lights. So that's why you can start looking at maps and say, okay, what am I looking at? What are potential reasons why I'm not seeing lights here? It's like you see here, this is the Amazon basin. We know not a lot of people live in the Amazon basin, and certainly those people that live there don't have electricity. So, of course, you're not going to see any lights there. You can see the bigger splotches of lights correspond with bigger cities. We can make that determination. You can see in the United States is split almost right in half. You see a lot of light in the eastern United States and not very much light in the western United States. Well, why is that? Living in the United States, you should know that the western states are not very densely populated. There's not a lot of people that live outside of the cities out there. Thus, you don't see that many lights. So that's just an example of how we can take different types of material and interpolate from a map. So geography, again, it's very multidisciplined. So we're talking about the spatial aspect of it with maps. Another thing is the environment, our physical landscape. How does human activity and human behavior coincide with our natural environment? And how do we affect that natural environment, and how does that natural environment affect us? It goes in both directions. So here you're going to talk about more of a physical geography type lesson. There's a whole course on physical geography. I don't know if they offer that right now. I know I looked at teaching that. I actually teach an environmental geology course in addition to this course, so that's one that's very closely related to physical geography. But this really drives home on how the earth, the natural processes, and people interact and how they affect each other. And again, take spatial deviations and put those on a natural map. When you look at a map, we're talking about, when you look at it, you should know what the scale is. So on every map, you'll see a scale. Or you should see a scale if it's a well-done map. And what a scale is that's telling you on this map how far that distance is. For instance, let's say this is 1 inch. So you could say 1 inch equals 600 miles. Or on this map, you can say 1 inch equals 70 miles because we're closer in on this map than we are on this map. That's the scale. That tells you if it's a large scale or a small scale map, depending on how much. You see here, we zoomed all the way into a city, and 1 inch equals just 10 miles. Here we zoomed in further, and 1 inch is equal to 3,000 feet. So you can see that's the way that you kind of can calculate distance on a map. Of course, now in GIS, Google Earth, it's going to do it for you if you want it to do so. But you can glance at this scale, and before we had GIS, and we would measure, say, okay, 3 inches is 9,000 feet. So that's how we would measure. That's just a little under 2 miles. So that's how we would measure distance on a map. So that's the scale of a map. That's basically, if you're in a satellite, how close or far away you're looking at a specific area. And you're going to play around a lot with this on Google Earth. So the next thing I want to talk about is how we separate the parts of the world with regards to people and space, both working together. And we've come up with this idea of geographic realms. Now, I'll tell you, when I was in college, when we took a world regional geography class, the way we separated the world was by continent. And if you don't know, there's 7 continents, 6 of which are populated. The 7th is Antarctica, which there's only scientists and penguins there, so we don't really study that much in world regional geography. So we have 6 continents. We have North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. So those are the 6 continents, and that's how we would study those. However, when you look at those continents, and then you look at the cultures, the land, everything together, it's really not as accurate as studying it by a realm. What a realm does is a realm takes different factors together and kind of categorizes these places and splits them up a little bit differently. For instance, it will take the physical environment into consideration. Think climate. And it takes the functional interaction of human societies in consideration as well. Think something like religion, historical. How has that specific area or region interacted over time? What type of influence does it have on the earth today in the world order of things? So you put all these things together, and we came up with several geographic realms. Now I'm going to use one as an example. I'm going to use one that actually straddles two continents, North Africa and Southwest Asia right here, because this best exemplifies what we're talking about on why we divided these up. So this is actually on two different continents. You have Asia here, you have Africa here. But if you look at the climate, first of all, this climate, this is the Sahara Desert in northern Africa. This is a desert, the Arabian Desert over here in Saudi Arabia and in Persian in Iran. So you have similar climate, you have similar cultures, because you can tell, first of all, they're roughly at the same latitude, which is a measure of north and south from the equator. You're going to learn that in your videos for Google Earth. You also have a very similar religion. Almost all of these countries are Muslim. I think all of them are officially Muslim countries, even though they differ Sunni and Shia. They are all Muslim countries. So you have similar cultures, you have similar climate. Several things come together to make these very closely related. Therefore, we made this the same realm. Sub-Saharan Africa, which again, the Saharan Desert is up here, but once you get south of the Sahara Desert, you see this kind of dotted blue line, which is a transition zone. You get into a distinctly different culture and climate than the northern part of Africa. So those are two different realms. You see here, when I was in school in North America, of course, where we're located, you should know that from high school. So right now, in the realm, we have the North American realm, but you see only Canada and the United States are included in that. When I was in school, we would have studied North America as Canada, United States, Mexico, and Central America, all the Central American countries. But now, that's the Middle American realm. Because if you think about the cultures, Mexico, Central America, which is Guatemala, Costa Rica, Panama, the Caribbean islands, they have a similar culture. Their climates are diversified a little bit, but they have a very similar culture, similar in the fact that they were colonized by mostly the same types of countries. Therefore, their culture stands out from the United States and Canada. Therefore, that's now a different realm unto itself. And in South America is a continent that is also a realm, because most of the countries there share that similar culture as well. So you can see that we have kind of transitioned from just studying by land area like I used to do when I was in school, to studying more of how the world is organized from a human aspect. And again, you can have different boundaries for these realms depending on physical means. It might be a mountain range, it might be oceans. If you go back up here, of course, the ocean surrounds South America. North America, Middle and North America are more cultural. Here in Africa, you have separation of both culture, and you see there's a wide transition zone here that kind of is in between these two. That's because the environment slowly transitioned as you go south to a more humid environment, not quite as dry as it is in the Sahara Desert. So that's why there's several different ways that we might actually delineate these and make the boundaries with the way they do. You can read this in your textbook, monocentric and polycentric. Now remember, a realm is different than a region. A region is a more tightly confined area within a realm. And for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to use the United States and tell you that the United States, and probably most of you have heard this, you got like the South, the Midwest, the Prairie, the Pacific Coast, the East Coast, the Northeast. Those are our regions within the United States. And those regions are differentiated on different types of criteria. A little bit of climate, mostly culture, we think of ourselves. Actually, I think of Kentucky as being a split. Sometimes it depends on what sources you use too. Some books will put entire states in one region or another. Some books or sources will actually split states in a more accurate measurement. For me, I think of the South. I always use this example because when I was younger, when I went to University of Kentucky, that's where I got my bachelor's degree. So I'm from Glasgow, if you hadn't watched the intro video yet. And down here, I went to Glasgow High School. And I played sports and all that stuff. So they always called us the city boys because we went to Glasgow and the county, Barron County, they had their county school. And, you know, that's kind of how we grew up. We didn't know any better. So, and you can tell I have a pretty thick Southern accent. When I went to UK in Lexington, it was kind of a culture shock because I was the biggest hick up there. I mean, I taught more country than anybody up there did almost. And a lot of people that went to UK were actually from Ohio. They were coming to Lexington to go to UK. So it was a very different dynamic living here in South Central Kentucky than it was in Lexington. In the beginning of my career with state government, I actually took a job in Ashland, Kentucky, which is in the extreme northeast corner of the state. It's in Appalachia. The first day I started there, I was a supervisor, and my employees asked me where I was from. And they thought I was from Georgia or Alabama or somewhere like that because my accent down here in Bowling Green in South Central Kentucky, we have more of a Southern accent, whereas Appalachia has a different dialect, a different accent than we do here. So even though we're both from the same state, they thought I was just from the deep, deep South somewhere. So I kind of share those stories because that's how I started thinking about stuff when I was younger. I was like, wow, this is kind of eye-opening that there's this much variety within one state. But that's basically how we divide up the country is in different regions. So these are some of the specific criteria for the regions. Again, I'm not going to go through this in detail for sake of time on this lecture. All this is very well pointed out in your textbook. I'm just kind of pausing to read through this stuff. So globalization, you hear that word a lot today, and a lot of times it's used in a negative context because of politics and all the conspiracy theory videos out there. Globalization has been occurring since I was young, and before that, but it's really in my lifetime is really sped up. When I was young, we had globalization. We were starting to trade with other countries more. There were different dynamics going on in the world, but with the onset of technology during my lifetime, the internet, being able to, talk to somebody across the world, even though that's a very personal thing on an individual level, it also exists at the highest levels. So now with that, plus as salaries have risen over the decades, and it's more commonplace for people to fly on vacation, to travel the world. So the world's really opened up. And we kind of saw a little example of that in the pandemic we had a couple of years ago with COVID. It's amazing that some of that stuff hasn't happened a little bit sooner than it has, just because in history, in human history, going back, almost all of human history, it's only been the last probably, 100 years or less that people are so openly allowed to travel across the world. I mean, think about when commercial airlines first started. I mean, it hadn't been that long. So the sharing of things, even germs, from totally different populations is relatively a new thing in human history. So that's not, I don't think that's going to be out of the question for that kind of stuff to happen in the future. But on the same track, on a more positive one, we have freer communication, freer trade. We're able to interact with each other more. Now, some people, especially the conspiracy theorists, are afraid that that's going to homogenize the entire planet and everybody's going to be kind of the same and we're not going to stand out anymore. But that's not entirely true, because sometimes it also kind of shows the contrast and differences between cultures, which, some positive, some negative, but it can exasperate in both directions. It's a positive thing overall for people to be more in touch with each other. And again, we have our natural environment, physical geography. I'm going to talk about this a lot during the semester. However, I'm going to kind of breeze through it here because I've already really mentioned it some. The one thing I'm going to mention is we're going to have just a very, very simple review of Earth processes in this first chapter. Just so you understand how the Earth operates, the tectonic plates, the ring of fire, how the plates move on the surface, volcanoes, earthquakes. All of these things have really contributed to how the population distribution is on the planet, why the planet is organized on the surface the way it is, and it still affects us today. This is a map of the Pacific Ring of Fire out here, but in general, the tectonic plates. But the Pacific Plate, we'll specifically talk about the Ring of Fire, which is basically all along the plate boundary for the Pacific Plate. You have an abundance of earthquakes and volcanoes. It's the most active place in the world, and that's because of the way these plates are moving with each other. Now, again, I'm not going to go into great detail on this. Actually, I do go into great detail in my environmental geology course that I teach. We study this stuff pretty extensively. But I want you to be aware of the effects of this, and you're going to have several questions on upcoming even tests because we're going to be talking about these specific places. So that has a huge effect. If you look here and you see all of the earthquakes or active volcanoes, that's a lot around a lot of the big population centers in the world. So it definitely has an effect on human population and some of our interactions. We're going to talk about climate change a lot. We'll discuss the greenhouse effect. I have a few videos about this. And before I forget to say anything else, I assign these videos, these YouTube videos in your lesson. Be sure to look at those because there are tests on the quizzes and stuff from those, and they're very, very helpful in understanding some of this. I try to select ones that aren't very long, so it's not like an hour long or anything. Most of them I try to keep under 10 minutes. A few are a little bit over, but not too much. And they're really good at explaining some of these things. We're going to talk about climate change some, its effects on humanity, not just the planet, but humanity. As climate change continues to increase, our climate's going to change drastically. It already is. I can see a definite difference in my lifetime. And as that occurs, it's going to start affecting more of the things that we're actually going to be talking about in detail in this course, like human migration patterns. People aren't just going to be migrating because of money and politics anymore. They're going to be looking for water and a better climate to live in where they can grow fruit, things like that. All the studies have confirmed all the original assumptions about the greenhouse effect from way back in the 1990s, even 1980s. It is a thing. It's happening. It's one of those things. I really get into this in my environmental geology course. We talk about it a lot more. I actually talk about some of the conspiracy theory and politics around climate change a little bit more in there. This is something that's not in doubt. I know different people have different political dispositions, or, I see a lot of people saying, I just don't know what to believe. I see so much information that contradicts each other. Well, you don't really see contradiction in the scientific community. The only people that contradict it are ones that get paid to contradict it, pretty much. This is a thing. It's happening. And it's really happening faster and worse than even the models that we had on it. The temperature is rising faster than we thought it would. The ice at the poles is decreasing faster. And it's got a potential to really cause some problems for humans here on Earth. And we're going to kind of touch on this as we go through the process here. The Anthropocene is the epoch that we live in now. Basically, that's since humans have been here and the effects that we've had on the natural environment. One thing I want to point out here before we get past climate change is the difference in weather and climate. A lot of people get this confused. I see a lot of comments on, climate change must not be real because we just had the coldest Christmas we've had in forever. That's just ridiculous, to be honest. Weather is an immediate state of the atmosphere. Weather is localized, day to day. Climate is an aggregate overall trend in the weather. So one snowstorm does not contradict climate change. As a matter of fact, if you looked at the facts on the matter, we've seen this thing called a polar vortex recently. That's the name that they've given us, where it gets just ridiculously cold here. And you might be thinking, well, how is it that the globe is supposed to be warming up, but we're so cold here? Well, the reason was, if you looked at the week of Christmas, when it was so cold, and that was an event that doesn't happen very often here in Kentucky and the eastern United States, really. So if you look at that week across the globe, though, you'd have seen that Europe experienced one of the warmest couple of weeks that they've had around Christmas in their history. You think, well, how can that be? They're actually further north on the globe than we are. Well, when we have these bulges of warm air somewhere in the world, what it does is it displaces the cold air that's supposed to be up at the North Pole. It pushes it down to the other side of the globe. And we happen to be on the other side of the globe. So that's what happened. So all these things have a very strong basis in science. And I just want y'all to understand that. And I don't want to talk about that stuff too much because I don't want to honor the conspiracy theorists on unseating this idea of climate change, but it is something that we have to deal with in the real world. And that's why I don't shy away from mentioning it, just because, we're here to learn from science and not to wish things were the way that we wanted to be in our minds. And we can now go to find a YouTube video on anything to support our stuff that we want to be true, but might not necessarily be true. So what I hope that you learn from courses like this, again, I mentioned this in my intro video, is I want you to have that ability to be able to go and find an answer to a question that you might have. And that's a good one to talk about, like climate change. Or if you don't know what to believe, well, how do I figure out if it's real or not? Well, we're going to learn in this course how to look at things in a critical manner and not just believe anything that we might see somewhere that has some kind of agenda. And that's very, very difficult to do in today's age. And I really, really envy you all. Most of you are probably younger people that have to kind of navigate that, because I didn't have that kind of thing when I was young. So climate, we have climate regions. Again, I'm not going to go into great detail on this. I want you to read this in your textbook, but they're basically categorized in these primary regions. You got your equatorial and tropical, dry climates, temperate, which we're in a temperate, cold, frigid polar, and then highlands, which should be highlands like the Himalayas and the high plains of the Himalayas. Here's the global map of the different climates, and you can see here you have the primary climate regions like the A, B, C, D, but under those you have subcategories, because under each one of these, say for instance the humid temperate climate, which is what we're in here in Kentucky, we've got no dry season, which that's what we're in. You have an exceptionally dry winter or an exceptionally dry summer. So we really don't have a dry season here in Kentucky. We have months that it's a little drier than others, but we don't have a true dry season where it doesn't rain for like 3 months. We never have that unless we're in extreme drought. So we're that CFA climate. And you can look around the world and see where else has a climate like ours. A little bit down here in Argentina, it looks like. China has a pretty good chunk of it over there. So check these out. You will have questions on these on your quiz and the test coming up when we start to study different countries. And here's an example of what I just showed you, how it divides up each of the climate regions. So World population. You're going to hear the word sustainability a lot. Sustainability is the ability for any given environment to support a population of whichever type of animal in that environment. So think about a local thing. We're kind of here in the country in Kentucky. We hear a lot about deer hunting, all right? So deer eat a lot of stuff, a lot of vegetation. When you have too many deer, the deer eat all the vegetation that they can eat, and you start to see the deer population suffer. You see skinnier, smaller deer. Some of them kind of look sick. They're not healthy. So we have a deer hunting season. And that's one of the justifications that we have to have hunting seasons, which is, it's fine. And we cull a certain amount of deer because there's only a certain sustainable population before they start to decline. Okay, and humans have, since people enjoy hunting deer, that's a good way to monitor that population. Well, the same idea applies to any population of any animal in any environment, including humans on the earth. Now, don't take it that I'm suggesting that we have some kind of hunting season. That's totally not the point. I just use that as a local example of how the population can be sustained to a certain level. So what's the sustainability level for Earth with regards to humans? Well, we're probably going to find out in the coming generations. We have an exceptional amount of people in this planet right now. This graphic says 7.7 billion. This textbook is a few years old. I'd say it's probably 8 billion or a little more by now. I'm just guessing. I probably should have looked that up before I started this lecture, but I didn't. When I was in graduate school, it was 4 billion. So it's doubled since I was most of your age. And it's only going to continue to rise until probably we reach a tipping point. And if we reach that tipping point, it could be very, very bad time for humans on this planet. You can see here we occupy less than 30% of the Earth's surface. Of course, most of that is ocean, but there are also great swaths of land that are very uninhabitable to people as well, or not easily inhabitable, I should say. So it says here by 2050 it's going to reach 10 billion. I would say probably a little bit sooner than that it will reach that. And you can see it says every dot represents 100,000 people, and you can see the dots, how they're kind of clustered in certain spots and areas, mostly around big cities. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind, population density. So population distribution means where are the people living. So you look at a map and see the distribution. Okay, a lot of people in China, a lot of people in India, a lot of people in Europe. Population density is more of a measure of how many people per unit of area live there. So that tells us kind of how packed in they are. So think about it, typically in the United States we say per mile. So let's say in Wyoming you might have a population density of 5 people per square mile. In Japan that might be 2,000 people per square mile. I'm just making those numbers up. I haven't looked those up either, but that gives you an idea of population density, how many people are crammed into a certain area. And that's very important while we study things, because the more people, the more dense the people are in any area, the harder it is on the environment, the more infrastructure you need, the more jobs you need. It's very, very important, population density. So major population clusters, I just mentioned those, 2 in Asia, South Asia and East Asia. South Asia being basically India, East Asia being more or less China, and then Europe is another population cluster. Most of the population is urban. 55% of that is urban. So most people tend to migrate to cities when the countrysides are very, very poor and they can't find work or they can't meet their needs in the country. They tend to go to cities to try to find jobs and have resources. So another way that we can delineate realms, we talked about the culture part of that. So there's 2 things in the culture part that we really look at, and that is language and that is religion. Those are 2 big cultural things that we can use to delineate culture within different population groups and realms. Again, I'm not going to hit on that very much. I've already mentioned a lot of that. There are a little over 200 countries in the world today. And most of those countries, the way we are organized in the world today, kind of has its roots in the European state model. We're not going to get into great detail on the history of Europe, but basically, as their governments evolved over time, they became nation states and then modern countries, and you can read all that in your textbook. Geopolitics, again, another area of concentration in geography that basically studies the politics of certain countries and how they relate among other countries. You all see this on a global scale today when we talk about Russia and Ukraine, China, Taiwan, the United States, our neighbors, how we interact with Europe, our allies. All that falls under the geopolitics model. Economic geography is pretty much how it sounds. These geographers are going to focus on the spatial aspects of the way societies live as far as their economics, how their works, production, consumption of goods. And then we're going to talk about development. Sustainable development, again, that word sustainable. That is, sustainable development is long-term viability to successfully grow within your sustainability with regards to your physical environment and natural resources. So you're going to grow in a way that's not going to ruin those resources. Inclusive development is a term that means that you're going to include all segments of your population within that. So different races, different religions, different cultural identities. So here's a map of the countries of the world. You can see that in your textbook. Kind of just reading through here. I'm not going to go into all those in more real detail. So we have 4 what they call global core areas. And basically what that means is those core areas have a good population and they exert influence over the areas around them or on a global scale. And these are the 4 areas: North America, which is basically us and Canada, United States and Canada; Europe, East Asia, which is going to be Japan and parts of China, or all China pretty much. This just includes part of China, but it's going to be China. And then it has Australia and New Zealand. Now, I'm kind of on the fence personally about Australia and New Zealand. They certainly have a large influence on the Pacific area immediately around them. On the global stage, I don't think they're as important as maybe up and coming one, which would be South Asia, which would be India and South Asia. But for this lesson, they include that in there. And we've already mentioned globalization earlier in the lesson. And one of the big things about globalization is it has a big effect on the climate crisis that we have right now. And we can't get 10 people in a room to agree on something, so you can think about how difficult it's going to be to get every country in the world, every government in the world to buy into what we need to do to fix climate change. So for me anyway, this is probably the primary issue facing the world today, the world population. It's climate change / sustainability, human sustainability. How many people we have and climate change together is to me the biggest issue on our planet. Now we can look at other issues, and there certainly are other very important issues, and we talk about wars and politics all the time. But the bottom line is if our environment doesn't work for us, we cease to exist. That's just the simple truth of the matter. The scary thing about climate and our environmental problems is we all understand human nature, and the idea that something is not that important until it affects you directly. And probably most of you listening to this right now think, well, how is it affecting me directly? Well, it is. Because a lot of the things that we use and buy daily, our food, our gas in our cars, those prices are going up. And it's not because Trump did something or Biden did something. It's because we have more people in the world and we're using up all of our resources. Oil, petroleum, is getting harder to find because we've already accessed all the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff. We're getting into worse grade or harder to reach geographic areas to get our oil, and it's just going to continue to rise. It's going to fluctuate up and down. It's gone down a little bit now, but it's going to go back up again in the future, regardless of who the president is or anything like that, because it's a finite resource. And we're not doing anything to look to the future to address that. Same way with food. You know, food is a resource that we in the United States have been self-sufficient. We've been lucky in that in our history. But the population is getting to the point where we're going to start outgrowing our food. And it's going to get more expensive. Pair that with climate change, when climate is starting to affect our crops that we have even here in the United States. And by the way, I mentioned in my intro video, I work with the agriculture community in my career job that I do 5 days a week. And it's not getting any easier on them because of climate change. So we're going to pay more. So it does affect you. You might not think it does, but it does. When we see higher prices at the grocery store, that affects you. But by the time it really affects us to where we're like, oh no, this is bad, it's going to be too late. And that's what's so scary about these environmental issues. Because once you hit a certain tipping point, at that point it's going to be too late. So we need to hope that we can work together to solve these things before it does become too late. And again, I've already mentioned the migration issues and why migrants do what they do. We'll talk about that more during the semester as well. And that's the realms again. And that's it for this lecture. So I'm sorry if it went a little bit long, but I'll try to shorten them down in the future and cover less. Y'all can let me know. Like I said, communication is key here. Y'all need to let me know your preferences on things. And if you like a longer lecture or a shorter lecture, but going forward, we're going to start hitting the different parts of the world. We're going to start out, I think, with North America is our first one. And then I've been looking at different textbooks, so that's why I might change textbooks next semester. But I think North America is our first one. So I'll be back with another lecture on that next week. Thank you.